Hey, I have a second channel. Cube Comp MTDX.
Hey everybody. So this video I'm going to be talking about power saving functions built into a hard disk drive. So the reason I'm making this video is because I recently got a comment on a video. The viewer was asking about what kind of software could they install to shut down a drive, basically, to have it cycle off when it's not being used. And I just wanted to mention that hard disk drives for several years now have had a power save function built into them. So generally you will not see this power save functionality activate when your hard drive is your boot drive, because of course Windows or your whatever operating system you have generally is going to be accessing the drive for something. Even when your system is sitting as idle as it can be, there's always going to be some sort of program or service running in the background. It's like the computer, when it's turned on, it's always doing something. And on occasion, it is accessing the drive. So the hard disk drive will generally not sit idle long enough for it to initiate a power down to conserve energy. But when you have one of these set up as a data drive or just as a spare drive in the computer, generally that drive will not be getting accessed near as often. So without installing any software, generally doing no special configuration to the computer, it's not uncommon for these hard drives to cycle off on their own. One good example would be the slave drive or secondary drive in the Computer Plexi. And it's not exactly a new hard drive either. It's a 120 gigabyte Seagate SATA hard drive from probably around 2006 roughly. It does this all the time because, I'll start the system up and of course the hard drive starts up, and of course when at times there's actually no partition on the drive, but even when there is a partition on the drive, it generally does not get accessed a whole lot. So when I start the system up, the Plexi, it'll start up as usual, all hard drives running, and then after, I guess, maybe 15 minutes or so, the secondary hard drive will indeed cycle off. Sometimes you'll actually hear it. You'll hear it click and you'll hear the drive wind down. And the thing I absolutely cannot stand about this is, let's say you do need something on that hard drive, and you go to access it. You may notice there's a brief pause in the system, not a hard freeze. Now, sometimes when you're working with a program that's accessing a file on said drive that goes into sleep, that program generally will actually momentarily freeze up. And generally this tends to happen with one of my external hard drives that I use sometimes, that I carry some files around on. Sometimes if I edit videos while I'm on the go, I do take this external drive with me. It's actually a pretty old drive. It's an older Western Digital, I think, my book, 1 terabyte USB 2.0 external hard drive. And it's just essentially one of these guys, a 3.5 inch desktop hard drive inside of a little enclosure with a SATA to USB adapter built into it. And the power save on that drive is really, I think it's only I think the timer on it's like 5 minutes or so. And I'm not sure if it's actually the controller in that external enclosure, if it's the actual hard disk itself. But given I think it's a Western Digital green drive, it wouldn't surprise me if it's actually encoded into or embedded into the firmware. So that's one thing that absolutely just drives me nuts about drives when they go to sleep like that, is when you do need to access a file, there is that momentary pause or sometimes that momentary hang in your program while the software is waiting for the hard drive to spin back up. Now, of course, yes, the hard drive spinning down and going to sleep will save you a little bit of energy, but I mean, if you're like me, you probably won't ever really notice the difference on your power bill. But to be honest, I personally think it's not good for these things to be cycling off and cycling back on regularly. It's just it's, for example, that external hard drive that I have, I was mentioned of. On every computer that I actually attach it to, I have installed a little utility called No Sleep HDD. There's a handful of these little applications out there you can download, and what they do is just every so many minutes or whatever, there's a text file that they create a text file on the drive, and they just write to it every so often, which keeps the drive alive. It keeps it busy. Well, not busy, but it keeps it alive. It sees activity every so often, so it never gets to the point where it goes into sleep. So the drive is always there, ready to go when you need it. Yes, it's running all the time, and some of you may think, well, that's not good for a hard drive to run all the time, is it? Well, I'm going to be honest with you. The Cube Inventor Lux, my system, it never shuts off. It runs all the time, 24/7, 365. Main reason is because I care about my data, and I don't like my hard drives to be cycling on and off, on and off, and on and off, day after day after day, or hour after hour after hour. The hard drives in that system stay running all the time. Those hard drives, by the way, were installed, I want to say in 2013 or 2015. They're Hitachi Desk Stars. Now, the backup drive, of course, took a dump back in, I think 2017, 2018. It actually had a smart flag, but the thing is, I recently tried to use that drive, and then, of course, even Crystal Disk Info flagged it as a failing drive. And one thing I should mention is that one drive, I never did actually have any sort of the utility I mentioned of, the No Sleep HDD. I never actually set it to keep that drive alive, because I rarely ever access that drive. And I guess I could say I was okay with it cycling off, but the thing is, Windows is going to be Windows. It's going to eventually have some sort of query for that drive and wake it back up. So it wasn't necessarily uncommon for that drive to cycle on and cycle off, cycle on and cycle off. Now, that drive was actually not a Hitachi Desk Star. That drive was actually a white label hard disk drive, probably made by Western Digital as a generic drive. But yeah, it's just a fun example of what can happen when these things cycle on, cycle off, cycle on, cycle off. It always seems that drives that stay on longer and literally stay on, not going to sleep, powered on, running all the time, seem to last longer. Because, time and time again in previous videos where I would diagnose computers and I would pull up Crystal Disk Info, for example, some of these Optiplex 390s back here, some of them drives had loads of hours on them, but only a handful of power cycles. And there was a few out of the bunch that were failing. Maybe I think a small handful, something like that. I can't remember for sure. But the overwhelming majority of them were fine. But in times past, I would get computers in for service that were cycled on and off every day. The hard drives themselves wouldn't have all that many power on hours, but they'd have a ton of power cycles on them, and they would have bad sectors or have something going wrong with them. So generally, I like to leave hard drives running all the time. Now, the one exception is the Plexi back here. I don't leave the Plexi running all the time. Of course, when you have a bunch of systems running, it will increase your power bill. So the Plexi generally does not run all the time, but a lot of times during the wintertime, I will leave it running because it is a little bit of a heat source, actually. So I do keep it running during the winter months more often, but during the summertime, I generally don't leave it running all the time. I generally turn it on when I need it, and when I'm usually finished with it, I will turn it back off. But it has a Western Digital Enterprise class 1 terabyte drive as the main drive, so I'm not too worried about it. It's a pretty robust drive. But so I mean, I want to say now this is really just my own opinion, but like I mentioned, I do like to leave these things on, just leave them running all the time, because it does seem it does seem like if in a situation to where you're regularly needing stuff off the drive, it's good to keep them on. And I want to say some RAID controllers will automatically do this for you. Like for example, in the Mid-Tower Deluxe, I don't have. Ever since I upgraded the motherboard in the Mid-Tower Deluxe to the current board that's in it now, it's an ASRock X370. I forget the exact model off the top of my head. It's a X370 killer SLI AC, something like that. Newer motherboard, and of course I have the RAID controller enabled because 2 of my data drives are in a strike configuration, and that RAID controller seems to keep all the drives running all the time, whereas in the past only the drives that were in RAID would be running all the time. And that would explain why the backup drive was allowed to cycle on and off, and probably led to its failure. Now I do have to have the No Sleep HDD software, or No Sleep HD software, loaded onto the system for my Western Digital MyBook drive, because sometimes, like I mentioned, that drive likes to go to sleep all the time when you plug it in, and it's frustrating because sometimes when you go to grab a file off of it, or if you're running video editing software and it goes to fetch a file, it can really put things into a snag. So there's 2 reasons why I don't like drives to go to sleep. Number 1 is what I just mentioned. I like for drives to be ready for access. I'd prefer not to have to wait on them to spin back up. And number 2, it seems that the drives simply last longer when they're running all the time. Because let's face it, hard drives, they don't like to be cycled on and off as far as the thermal stress goes. I mean, they warm up and they cool off. It's generally not very good for them. And yes, it will use a little more energy to run them all the time, but hey, I mean, I'd rather spend a little bit extra on electricity to get more life out of my hard drives. I mean, you think about it, these things, they don't pull, I mean, the hard drives themselves don't pull all that much power. You have to consider the replacement cost of the drive, and of course the fact that, let's say if the drive fails with your data on it and you have no backup, then you're in a tough situation. So generally I do like to keep these things running all the time. So again, I just want to make this video because I again had a viewer asking about ways to turn the drive off. Just want to say that generally hard drives, they have that built into them. You don't have to install anything. It's generally built in to where if the drive itself is not being accessed by anything, like if it's a secondary drive, generally you'll notice it will cycle off. And again, this does apply to desktop hard drives and laptop hard drives too, not just externals. So anyways, hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching. Well everybody, that wraps it up for this video, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please like the video. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and be sure to tick that bell so you'll get notified when new videos are posted. Also, don't forget I have a whole lot of other interesting videos here on the channel to check out. And also, in addition, I have a second channel, CubeCompMTDX, where I have all sorts of other videos not exactly related to technology. Links to the channels are available at the end of this video. Again, I thank you for your support and thanks for watching this video.